Can you hear me, Councillor Brain, Councillor Sexton?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, brilliant.
Thank you.
That's great.
And we are live now.
Okay, so just remind you that this meeting is being streamed live. We've obviously only got the one item on the agenda. So without further ado, I think we might as well go straight into the paper, Karen.
Thank you, Councillor De Sico. Yes, this is the latest tranche of funding supplied by the government to support the care sector with the additional COVID-related costs, and this covers infection control and testing. You will see reference also in the report to workforce capacity funding, and at the time of writing the report we had no further details of what that was going to be. We'd had previous iterations of funding but weren't sure what we were going to get and what the conditions attached to it. That arrived yesterday, so I will be able to give you a verbal update on some of those things if you would like that later, but there are no major changes to what we've seen previously, but I can give you a verbal outline. So the reason that we're presenting this today is to ask for your approval to distribute the allocated funding for infection control and testing following the principles and conditions attached to the funding. So you'll see in paragraph 3.4 that this is to be distributed to prevent or to reduce the rate of COVID transmission within and between care settings, and to encourage effective use of prevention control practices, including those things that restrict movement of staff and encouraging people to take up vaccines and boosters, and to enable visiting where it can be done safely and without risk of introducing infection into the setting. For care homes, we're given a very clear indicator of how the funding should be allocated and what would be the expected sum for each home. And then similarly with community care providers, there's a clear methodology that we use and that's allocated to us accordingly. So the expectation is that within 20 days of receipt of this fund, we've distributed it according to the principles set out in this paper. This time around, we've had £874,000, which is slightly lower than the first 6 months, which is not unreasonable given that many of the costs and pressures have either diminished or the kind of things that were being implemented were one-off capital related costs. The main thing that we've got to work out with this one is the spend on staffing related things that are about making sure that they can be restricted to work with small groups, can avoid the use of public transport whenever possible, increase staffing numbers to allow for the extra time that is needed to manage with the use of PPE. Donning and doffing takes time. Having residents in care homes isolated means that there is much more individual care and time needed with them, and supporting groups and really dealing with the pressures that living with COVID still has, I'm afraid, but the rest of us that seem to be moving on. But for care homes to operate safely, there are still considerable challenges in working with them that take time and effort to maintain the quality of care that's offered. So the plan is that we will distribute this funding. We've had an immediate response from care providers who are very pleased to see that the funds have been extended, and they will be looking to comply with the conditions attached to it, and will comply also with the reporting requirements that are placed on the local authority to demonstrate that we've used the funding as it's been indicated. There's not a great deal more I want to say, other than that there is a strong focus still on making sure that infection is reduced, vaccinations are encouraged, and of course next week comes into place the mandatory vaccination requirement for care home workers, which will change that pressure there. So that's this particular funding, and if you're interested in a very brief mention of the workforce at this point, some of the pressures on care homes you'll be aware of are related to recruitment and retention of staff. It's a very challenging environment in the care sector at the moment, care at home or care homes, to find workers. This fund is not for that. The workforce capacity fund can be used and should be used to do what we can to increase the numbers of people working in care. This is about making them work in a way that is safe and provides protection to residents and those who use care services. I'm happy to answer any questions on the funding, but I think the paper pretty well sums up the basic principles and the conditions attached to the money that we've been given.
Thank you for that, Karen. I agree with you. The paper's self-explanatory. I don't really have any questions about the content. It all seems very sensible, the way the money's been allocated. And obviously, we're looking to reduce COVID infection and increase vaccination rates. So hopefully this money will allow us to do that. So I'm going to open for questions from other members, but thank you for that. Okay, so any questions from Councillor Sexton?
Thank you. I've got just a couple of questions. I fully agree. This all seems very sensible. I don't think there's anything terribly controversial here. The questions I have, point 3.16 about the vaccine element. I'm wondering whether that potentially covers sick pay for care workers who may experience side effects after having a vaccine. Because I've heard from a few people that one of their main concerns with having a vaccine is if they were to experience side effects, which quite a number of people do, they might have to take some time off work, and people worry that they might not be able to afford that. So is that something that is covered by this funding or not?
My belief is that is a reasonable cost associated with the take-up of vaccine. And what we would want to make sure is that staff don't come into work when they're feeling poorly, and that the care home or care provider is able to get substitute staff to fill the space left as well. Both of those I'd consider to be reasonable uses of the funding.
Great, so that's something we are pushing on. Fantastic. I also had just a point on the workforce, and I think this is funding that we're not fully aware of what's going on with this yet, but the 162.5 million nationally on boosting the adult social care workforce. I had some interesting conversations recently, actually, with the Future Social Care Coalition, and there were a number of representatives in that meeting who mentioned that retention bonuses in particular would be an effective way of ensuring that staff stay in those roles longer, and would help them to maintain their workforce. Is that something that we're looking at?
Yes, that's certainly one of the issues that is recognised in the allocation of the funding that we've been given. It's around £430,000 to be spent by the end of March, and certainly incentivising workers, retention is key, not simply recruitment. There's no value in putting a great deal of effort into constantly recruiting, training people up and then losing them. What we want to do is to retain them, reward them for the dedication that they've shown during the pandemic, the extra skills that they've acquired, and to show that they're appreciated and valued, so that they stay in the sector and continue to progress.
Fantastic. That's really good to hear. I am just scrolling through this.
Can I just come in? Can I just come in there before you carry on, Councillor Sexton? The point you make there about the fantastic work that the staff have done during the pandemic and going above and beyond, I think that needs to be recognised, and I'd be very happy that we could do that both financially and also just by saying thank you, you've done a great job. I think that's important, and I know that's shared by other authorities as well, because the staff have put in a tremendous effort to get us through the last 18 months.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. I was just going to reflect that, look, point 4.5, where we're talking about supporting family carers and enabling day centres to operate safely. I'm really pleased to see that, and I think that's really important. Again, I know a lot of people who've been in contact who've mentioned concerns about whether family and unpaid carers are being supported as well. That's really good to see. So aside from that, I've got no other comments. This all looks very good. I'm happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Sexton. Any other? Councillor Long.
Yeah, thank you. It was just one question. In 3.11, you mentioned some may choose not to accept the conditions attached to the funding. I was just interested whether we saw any in earlier rounds that chose not to accept the funding, and what particular aspects of the conditions that that was on the basis of.
It's fair to say that the conditions when these grants were first being issued were pretty onerous, and some providers over time have said, particularly smaller ones, have said, I'm not resourced to provide the admin that is involved in monitoring, reporting and the conditions attached to this. And some of the difficulties were, first of all, the funding was given with a very rapid time to have it spent. And for many of them, particularly if you were looking at things relating to workforce, it just wasn't realistic, and that put them off. I'm pleased to say that there was a consultation and review process that has changed some of these things. The monitoring for the workforce one in particular has been reduced. The monitoring, I believe, the reporting for the infection control one is also less onerous. So we'll be reporting twice on this allocation of funding before the end of March. And there is time, so long as the funding is spent by the end of March, that will be compliant with the rules. So I think the precise nature of how it has to be spent in both grants is also less prescriptive. So I think there's more scope now to be creative, to fix the problems each provider's got in a way that gives them some freedom to do that without being too constrained by directive ways of spending the money, which I think will be greatly welcomed. It's certainly a lot easier for us, because what we don't want is to have to distribute the funds and then claw it back because providers have simply not been able to comply with the conditions. But it does look as if they're going to be much more easy to comply with this time around, and take up has already, the expressions of interest, providers are already responding, saying they will accept the conditions and are looking forward to receipt of the funds so they can start spending.
Thank you. That's good to hear that there was some learning from the earlier rounds, but it's often a case with grants that the conditions can be so onerous that it does limit the uptake. So pleased to hear we're expecting less of that this time. Thank you. Nothing more from me.
Okay, thank you.
Good report.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. So I'm happy to approve the two requirements in 2.1 and 2.2. 2.1 to approve the allocation of the infection control and testing fund as set out in section 4, and 2.2 to delegate to the Director for Adult Care and Support the authority to make decisions on any discretionary usage of the workforce capacity funding. So thank you for that. And is there any other business? No? Okay, thank you. That's the end of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you staying on, Karen?
I can do, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Is that all right with you, David?
Yes, okay. I'll just stop the live stream.